Welcome to today's Explainer. What if I told you that the modern borders of India were drawn simply because someone, over 2 centuries ago, totally forgot to clearly define where a single mountain river actually begins? Today, we're unpacking a centuries-old piece of paperwork that literally transformed the entire geopolitical landscape of South Asia.
It honestly sounds like the plot of a geopolitical thriller, right? A missing detail from a document signed way before the invention of the typewriter is currently sitting right at the center of modern diplomacy. But to really understand how we got here, and specifically how this wild history forged India's northern frontiers, we've got to travel back over 200 years.
Now, just a quick disclaimer before we really get into the weeds. We are looking at this history entirely impartially, strictly following our source materials. We aren't here to take sides in any modern disputes. We're just here to uncover the fascinating facts of the past.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover 1. A 2-century border mystery, 2. Origins of the conflict, 3. The historic peace agreement, 4. Forging modern India's frontiers, 5. The missing river evidence, and finally, 6. 5 key historical takeaways.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, a 2-century border mystery, the Sugauli legacy. Okay, so picture this. It's the dawn of the 19th century, and the British East India Company is rapidly consolidating its massive influence across the Indian plains. But at the exact same time, the Kingdom of Nepal, which had just been unified under the Shah dynasty, is aggressively expanding its own domains right across the Himalayas. And you know how it goes. When two incredibly ambitious powers expand towards each other, a clash is basically inevitable.
Which brings us to Section 2, Origins of the Conflict. Expanding empires collide. These two powers were on a literal collision course. Nepal was pushing westward, absorbing rugged mountainous territories like Kumaon and Garhwal. Meanwhile, the British were desperate to push north. Why? Because they wanted to secure highly profitable trans-Himalayan trade routes into Tibet for goods like wool and salt. The immediate flashpoint between the two finally blew up in the lush Terai lowlands, which completely ignited the Anglo-Nepal War, also known as the Gorkha War, in 1814.
And that war? It was a massive reality check. The British were completely used to fighting on flat plains, but suddenly they were forced into this incredibly rugged, unfamiliar mountain terrain. The Gurkha army was drastically outnumbered. We're talking only about 5,000 to 8,000 men going up against roughly 30,000 heavily armed British troops. But the Gurkhas used the high ground with such legendary fierceness that they forced the British to fight for literally every single inch before finally suing for peace. Moving on to Section 3, the historic peace agreement, highs, lows, and timelines. The whole peace process wasn't exactly smooth sailing. It was a really turbulent diplomatic struggle. After the war broke out in 1814, an initial draft was drawn up in 1815 in the village of Sugauli. But the King of Nepal pushed back, and official ratification didn't happen until March of 1816. And interestingly, because history is always fluid, decades later in 1860, the British actually returned some of those Terai lowlands back to Nepal as a massive thank you for their military help during the Indian Rebellion of 1857.
So what were the actual highs and lows of this treaty? Well, while the war was devastating, the resulting peace established a lasting stability that was full of stark contrasts. For Nepal, it was a bitter low, costing them roughly 1/3 of their entire territory after suffering high casualties in fierce fights like the Battle of Makwanpur. But the major high point? Nepal successfully preserved its sovereign independence. They completely avoided total colonization. The British quickly realized it was way more practical to keep Nepal as an independent buffer state, and out of all that bloodshed, a deep mutual military respect was actually forged. Let's look at how this impacts us today in Section 4, Forging Modern India's Frontiers, the Useful Legacy. This is where things get super relevant for modern India. Massive, absolutely beautiful portions of India's strategic northern states were directly integrated because of this very treaty. When Nepal ceded Kumaon and Garhwal, those specific lands became the bedrock foundation for the modern Indian state of Uttarakhand. Territory stretching westward helped shape modern Himachal Pradesh, and the lowlands to the east ultimately gave India the world-famous region of Darjeeling and West Bengal.
And it wasn't just about drawing lines on a map. This was about serious strategic advantage. This history built the legendary military traditions that India deeply relies on right now. The British were so thoroughly blown away by the bravery of their Nepalese opponents that they actually wrote a provision into the treaty to recruit Gurkha soldiers into their own military. Fast forward to 1947, when India gained independence, they inherited these highly defensible mountain borders and this incredible tradition. Today, Gurkha regiments remain one of the most celebrated vital pillars of the Indian Army.
But here is the catch. Section 5. The missing river evidence. A diplomatic dispute.
This is the root of the whole modern dispute, a massive shortfall in our understanding due to a lack of explicit historical evidence. The 1816 treaty designated the Kali River, also known as the Mahakali, as the western boundary. Sounds simple, right? Well, rivers in the Himalayas don't just start at one neat, tidy little point. They're formed by multiple mountain streams merging together. And the colonial administrators back in 1816 completely failed to document which specific tributary they considered to be the actual, true source of the river. Because of that one missing detail, we now have two entirely different geographical interpretations, causing serious diplomatic tension. India points to an eastern tributary stream as the true origin. This means the highly strategic territory to the west of that stream, which includes the Kalapani region and the Lipulekh Pass, falls squarely within India. Nepal, on the other hand, points to a western tributary stream called Limpia-Dura. They claim that that is the true origin, which would place that exact same triangle of land within Nepal. It's a massive clash of modern interpretation, all stemming from a single, centuries-old omission.
Let's wrap this all up in Section 6, 5 key historical takeaways.
If you remember nothing else, keep these 5 points in mind, because decisions made over 2 centuries ago are still living and breathing today. 1. The 1816 Sugauli Agreement definitively ended the fierce Anglo-Nepal War. 2. It shaped the very modern northern borders of India. 3. It handed India the incredibly rich cultural and strategic foundations of states like Uttarakhand. 4. It birthed the awesome, enduring tradition of Gurkha military recruitment. And 5. A historical failure to precisely track a river source left us with a complex diplomatic puzzle in Kalapani that modern leaders are still dealing with.
History is absolutely never just a dusty list of dates and old papers. It's a living blueprint of our modern world. Understanding these treaties lets us actually understand the ground we stand on. So I'll leave you with this. How will the echoes of this 200-year-old frontier decision continue to shape the destiny, the military, and the diplomacy of South Asia? It's something to think about. Keep questioning, keep learning, and thanks for joining me in this explainer.